So when did we start writing it? When was that? That was less than a year ago, or more than, yeah, about a year ago.
Yeah, I think we'd been having conversations around, how we wanted our paper to be a bit more practical and engage with the kind of transformative aspects that we feel, action research or engaged methodologies would have to offer. So this was at the end of the Sustainability Forum in 2019.
Yeah.
And we had, I'd say, several Skype chats after that about how this might look and come about.
Yeah, I think it was also really useful to have a chat with Mark at the forum around, the way that they were seeing the paper contributing to the emerging discourse incubator in JSCM. So, obviously we had this interest in the methodology in the first instance, but I think they were also really interested in the theory aspect, which I think really was developed after that, because we had thought about the methods and these aspects of transformation and engaging with participants rather than doing research on people, but we were, I think we lacked perhaps the development of the theoretical angle to it.
Yeah, I think we really wanted to do something different, or to push what we felt was being done and what was possible. And we'd had a lot of conversations about, how our imaginations could be used as well to think differently. But that, I suppose, the participatory aspect of it was incredibly important. And that we wanted that to be running throughout this paper as well. I think that for me, a lot of it was going back to basics, that, we really had to think about what it is we wanted to do and how we were going to bound it, how far or how much we could take in, and what did
Yeah.
we really mean by all of these concepts or terminologies that we throw around, like
Yeah.
problematization or praxis, or what does engaged research even mean?
I was going to say that I think it's made me, the whole process made me think about really carefully about what we mean by engaged research. And I think the more we engaged with the literature on it, and the more we thought about even how action research had been sort of used in our field, the less I felt connected to that particular approach. And the more I saw a different way of thinking about engagement, kind of a broader sort of umbrella, that isn't necessarily just kind of, you go in a company and make changes that they want you to make, which is not what we had in mind in the first instance. I think ours was more rooted in sort of questioning values, assumptions, trying to be more inclusive, being mindful of our own kind of influences on the research process, and and the language that we use, I think.
And I think that that was, part of the other paper that the three of us wrote together as well, when the reviewers put it to us about our own positionality, and that, as three white Western researchers, we really need to question our own fundamental values and approaches. And I believe we brought this, or the questioning of this, well into this paper as well. So I think for me, the key issues, and we were just talking about this earlier, was really the idea that it would be, something that was really truly participatory, that would take in different perspectives that we don't always include because they're not monetarily attached to, the business case or the supply chain. And that we could think, are supply chains really something that connects us, or are they something that bind people? The power dynamics are definitely underexplored, even still, even though we're aware of them. Wanted to create a paper that doesn't privilege any one perspective. Apart from perhaps the environment, I guess we really want that to come through a bit more, the natural environment, and how we need to focus on that as a stakeholder as well. I think, fundamentally, it's that idea of participation, from the get-go, from problematizing, from even what is our research question, that we don't come with something that's predefined, that there's space and scope to allow other voices to have their say and to craft that, even if it fundamentally challenges what you believe. to be open-minded enough to take that on board.
Yeah, I think it's, yeah, I can, yeah, I really relate to what you're saying here. And I think in addition to that, it would be, if we take the theory angle, then, you know, how could our theories be actually relevant? You know, it's not, we're not coming in with preconceived ideas. We are inclusive in our processes of doing the research, but also of developing theory, testing theory, elaborating it, and involving the people that are kind of part of, you know, the phenomenon that we're investigating, to make sure that it speaks to them, and it brings something perhaps to them as well, because, you know, that's the point, right? If you're doing engaged research, you're motivated by this idea of hopefully making a difference. And again, like, we could have a whole discussion as to what making a difference means. And I think that's also what the paper is trying to say, is that there are several things to consider, but there's not one right way of doing it. There's no kind of recipe to doing engaged research and developing theory from it. It's about posing the questions, it's about interrogating our positions throughout the process, and making sure that we do that. And you know, that will result in something interesting, hopefully. Even, you know, even just challenging our own assumptions is already something that you can write about theoretically.
I think that was a really nice aspect of, you know, the table that Lee predominantly put together, was the idea that, you know, bringing in new voices would challenge our existing theories or extend them, or mean that we have to look, you know, further into other fields to look at theories that might be more useful.
What interests me about the paper, and why I was very keen to be involved in writing this paper, is I'm very interested in how engaged research relates to theorization. I think engaged research tends to be atheoretical, so it's engaged, it's practical, it develops relevant knowledge, but it's not always of interest to people that weren't involved in the research project itself. And I think what's interesting about this paper, and why I hope people will read it and use it, is because I think it develops a way for us to theorize using engaged research, and also invites us to think about the theorization process itself, and who's involved in theorizing, what the purpose of theorizing is, and how we actually theorize as well. So one of the key things for the paper, for me at least, is that we talk a lot about the three different types of theorization. So theory building, theory elaboration, and theory testing. And we talk about how engaged research can be used to do all of those in a different way, largely by engaging with practitioners to problematize our own knowledge and understanding of the world, and also to engage with practitioners to develop theories that are practical as well as interesting for academics. So those are the most important things for me. And I think the figure that we present in the paper really helps to show that there are many different ways in which we can conduct the process of theorization. So it doesn't have to be unengaged, and it doesn't have to be uncritical. And therefore we show that there's a space for what we call critical engaged research. And I think what's one of the strengths of the paper is that we go through all the different dimensions of what critical engaged research looks like, and present people with some ideas about how each of those dimensions might be operationalized in a research project to develop novel theory, or elaborate existing theories and test existing theories as well.
Yeah, and I think it's, yeah, when you describe it like that, I can see how it would be useful for someone who's done engaged research but has kind of had trouble sort of kind of trying to think about how it relates to theory. So trying to make that more explicit, I think that's what we tried to do. But also people who might want to do it and haven't, and you know, and how would you go about it? And I think, you know, the table is really kind of quintessential in the paper, because it gives the main questions, the sort of, as I said before, like I think we're not giving one size fits all answer, but we're giving tools perhaps to try and work around the critical engage research paradigm and theorization. So I think hopefully it'll be useful for people who are doing that. I would imagine,
And I
people
think
who have experience and haven't.
it was really enjoyable writing it as the three of us. I think that it really helped us sharpen our ideas, having to explain them to each other, to be honest. And I found it really enjoyable to do that. And I think it was really nice that it wasn't until we'd finished writing the paper that we actually defined critical engaged research. We needed all of the parts to fit together and to be a part of what we now understand it to be. And it did, start to resonate with us. Bits were cut out and bits were added back in, and bits were definitely debated at length, which for me makes me, more proud of it as a piece of writing. And so that probably leads us nicely into the idea of the review process and what we got from that as well.
Yeah.
Which, I definitely found it to be very constructive. They asked good questions and asked for things like more practical examples, which I do think is very important. It can be very hard to imagine what we're talking about sometimes. And if you can refer to another paper or have a read around it, or, I think it relates to what you were saying, Lee, is the research itself maybe isn't that interesting if you haven't done it. But if somebody has conducted engaged research and built theory from it, it is fascinating to see how that can all come together.
Yeah. I think in terms of the review process for me, I think one of the interesting things was just reflecting myself upon my own ideas, but also how I communicate my ideas as well. I think one of the things that was clear in the review process is that I think the reviewers sometimes felt that we were trying to push the one true way of doing research. And, that is very far from being the case. The whole point of the paper really is to show that there are at least 4 ways of theorizing, and then to map one way of doing it and explain it in detail. And I think this is a very important message of the paper, and something that we had to reflect upon a lot, which is how do we communicate that this is just one way of doing research without being dismissive of the other ways of doing research, which we're not at all. And this isn't a paper that is supposed to provide anyone with the one way of doing research or the truth about research. It's just suggesting that there are many ways of doing it, and this might be one way which people would want to consider. And then also around the language of the paper. The base literature for many of these ideas is a very complex literature. It's very deep philosophically. There's a lot of meta theory in there. There's a lot of unusual language. There's a lot of language used in very unusual ways, which might be counterintuitive. And a key challenge for us in the review process, and why the reviewers were really helpful, was in helping us to realize that, for one, and then helping us come up with ways around that so we could write a paper which we hope is very clear in its language and very clear in its arguments. So for me, that was the key thing from that review process, personally.
Yeah, and I think if I can build on that, I think you're right in terms of the literature and how it sort of felt like almost a translating process that we were doing. We were sort of blending in two mainstream, more than two, but I would say like sort of the critical kind of literature and perhaps the engaged research literature, and trying to translate that in an accessible manner. And I think I would hope that the paper would be like almost a gateway, to sort of, if you're interested in those literatures, then, go for it and go have an exploration. The point of the paper wasn't to summarize all these complex notions, but it was to try and put them together in a meaningful way to explain something that could be taken and be a sort of guide, rather than a sort of dictionary of the terms, I'd say. So a gateway to to other literatures, and again, I would emphasize that you said we're not trying to say there's one right way. There's so many different ways. We're just giving, a bit of space to one way in this particular paper to explain how it might work.
And that makes me reflect on the use of language throughout, which is something
Yeah.
we're, so interested in, I think. And, that there are already dominant discourses existing, and we're not trying to create a new dominant discourse. What we're
No.
actually trying to do is unpack the existing ones and our own ones. And I think
Yeah.
that the review process really highlighted that we were kind of taking discourses and piling them on top of each other in a way that was completely unclear. And hopefully we've managed to make it more translatable, and as you said, and to merge those different fields that we're drawing from as well.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I also feel like the process of this particular paper was very much a conversation. Sometimes, when you kind of send a paper for review in the usual kind of way, and for submission in a usual manuscript, it's sort of very one way. It doesn't feel like there is a conversation. Perhaps it's the time elapses between things, or I don't know. But this was a relatively quick process, and there was a lot of engagement and back and forth between ourselves as co-authors, and as you said, like, sort of explaining things to each other, and there was conversation with the editors as well and the reviewers, so it felt like a real conversation, which made the whole paper a lot better. So yeah, I would say that's a key point for me too.
I think that's actually a strength of the journal itself. I think this is the third paper I've published in JSCM, and I have to say that all of the review processes have been like that. They have been conversations. I think in all three papers, new ideas were presented, and the reviewers were very good at helping me think, or helping us think about those ideas, and putting them in such a way that they wouldn't be so shocking that they would turn off readers, but would actually be communicated in a way that was clear and engaging. And in all three of those processes, the journal has been very good. And I would recommend anyone with new ideas to submit them to JSCM, because they are very good at helping you think through those ideas, first of all, and then communicating them in a much clearer way than perhaps was done in the first draft that was submitted.
Yeah, and that links to Lucy's point, I think. Oh, go on, Lucy, sorry.
No, go.
No, about the discourses, and I think I think JSCM is obviously a key journal in our field, and the fact that they're willing to sort of open up beyond the dominant discourse is really good, and it's really encouraging. And I think, again, going back to who is this for, well, I would hope that because it's published in JSCM, then it'll make it look like a credible approach, as as much as other approaches, and it'd give hope to perhaps PhD students, because I was a PhD student doing some form of engaged research, and to be fair, it was hard at times because there wasn't so much out there giving me a guide, and also particularly in our field. So I think if you can find an anchor in the field, and and use it, then brilliant. If we've done that, then that'd be really happy.
Yeah, on the idea of discourse as well, I find it very interesting that in this EDI, in this issue of this EDI, we have two papers that are talking about discourse, and then as part of that, talking also about problematization as well. And I think there's a real sense in which these are sort of ideas whose time has come. We need to think about the discourses that we're using, how those shape the theories that we produce, how they shape the way in which we produce theories, and then also a broader reflection upon the language we use and how that can limit us sometimes, and how we can potentially break free of those things as well. And then also, I think there's a recognition that we do need to question what we're doing. Not necessarily question what each other are doing, but question what we're doing ourselves. So that's a key point about problematization, I think. It's often understood as it's the problematization of somebody else's views. And problematization is really much more challenging than that. It's the problematization of your own views.
Yeah.
And the key thing for me from this paper really is that critical engaged research, as we present it, is an opportunity for us to engage in that authentic problematization, the problematization of our own views. It's not to problematize the field or practitioners or any of that, although we'd want everyone to be involved in a problematization process themselves, but it's for us to do that hard work of questioning our own assumptions. And how do we do that? Well, we engage with practitioners, for one. We engage with people in our field and outside of our field. And then we do that hard work of challenging our own assumptions. And hopefully this paper will be of interest for anybody that's looking to do that hard work themselves, and will hopefully provide some ideas on how that's done.
I think as well, I would like, if you were a PhD student coming into this, I think it's somehow reassuring to see that this is messy. It is not a linear process, and that's okay. That is actually how it works. Because often you read an end product article and you think, oh, wow, I'll just do A, B, C, D, and E, and I'll get to the solution. But I think, we have hopefully shown here that it takes time, reflection. It is not straightforward. And that engaging fully with theory and theory development, testing, or elaboration isn't something that can be done in one sitting. Isn't something that can be done from just reading even the supply chain literature. You need to go beyond and question it a bit more. And I hope that that would be conveyed in what we've written here as well.
Yeah, and I think if what you're saying, Lee, about authentic problematization, I think if there is a time that's right, it's probably now, when we need to question the way we've been doing things and our own views and how our models work and don't work. And I think if we've managed to instill that message, then it's great.
And I think it's worth thinking about what is next. And I really enjoyed working up the example that we have in the paper around, almost looking back to look forward, how the kind of colonial underpinnings of the business environment could maybe be questioned a bit more in what we do. And that we're kind of offering this up as, future avenues to do things differently as well, to consider discourse and the utility of reflexivity in our own research. And I'd be delighted to read more papers that were, I suppose, touching on some of these ideas anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I think it'd be nice to see a bit more of that. I think what's next is to continue the conversation again. Like I just think, but maybe broaden the people around the table, and definitely this is something to talk about with our own PhD students, and anytime we have a chance to kind of discuss these issues, I think we should take it. We have to have these chats. We have to have chats with people who perhaps are skeptical about what we've said, because that's how things develop, and that's how ideas get to where they become really good ideas and people understand them. So yeah, continue the conversation is where I see things going.
I think in terms of the paper itself, I think, that idea of a conversation is a very important one. And it's not the end of a conversation, it's the start of a conversation. And I think, for me at least, when I've worked on something, the next step is to start critiquing what I've just done. And the key to that is engaging in with people from new areas, from new fields, from outside of my comfort zone. And if anyone wants to continue those conversations with me, and I'm sure Anna and Lucy feel the same, then yeah, you know where to contact us.
Yeah, I think as well, like we see, like obviously we supply chain management is a critical field, and it seems to talk to a lot of different other disciplines. Perhaps it's not called a supply chain, but I think, you know, this link between production and consumption and all the way through, and everything that happens, and the natural environment and the people involved in it, all of that talks to so many different disciplines that I think we are, you know, a field that needs to have the conversations, plural. So yeah.